The sickening crack of bone echoed through the modest wooden house on the outskirts of Carson City, Nevada Territory, in the spring of 1873. 18-year-old Gabriella Wilson's scream pierced the air as she crumpled to the floor, clutching her misshapen arm while her father, Silas Wilson, towered over her, his face twisted with drunken rage. "I told you never to speak to that Webster boy again," he bellowed, swaying slightly as the whiskey on his breath filled the room. "You think you can disobey me? You're my daughter, and you'll do as I say until the day you marry." Tears streamed down Gabriella's face as she tried to cradle her broken arm. The pain was blinding, radiating from her forearm where the bone had snapped cleanly when her father had wrenched and twisted it. Her mother had died 3 years ago from fever, leaving Gabriella alone with her increasingly bitter and violent father. Once a respected rancher, Silas Wilson had turned to the bottle after his wife's death, and his temper had grown darker with each passing season. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," Gabriella whispered through gritted teeth. "I was just helping Mrs. Parker at the general store." "Liar." Silas kicked at the floor near her, making her flinch. "Betsy Jenkins saw you talking to that boy behind the store. No daughter of mine is going to be some saloon man's whore." Gabriella didn't argue further. Thomas Webster was indeed sweet on her, but he was just a shopkeeper's son, not the degenerate her father painted him to be. They had shared nothing more than innocent conversation and perhaps a lingering glance or two. Her father stomped to the door, grabbing his hat. "I'm going back to the saloon. When I return, I expect dinner ready and not another word about this." The door slammed behind him, rattling the modest furnishings of their small homestead. Gabriella struggled to her feet, her arm hanging at an unnatural angle. She needed help, but the doctor's office was nearly a mile into town. With her good arm, she grabbed a shawl and draped it around her shoulders, using it to create a makeshift sling. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through her broken limb. The spring sun was beginning its descent toward the Sierra Nevada mountains as Gabriella stumbled down the dusty road toward Carson City. Her father's ranch sat about a mile outside of town, and the walk seemed interminable as she fought against shock and pain. A few tears escaped, but she brushed them away angrily. She had learned long ago that tears accomplished nothing. Halfway to town, the clip-clop of hooves approached from behind. Gabriella moved to the side of the road, her head down, hoping to avoid any unwanted attention. The rider slowed beside her. "Miss Wilson." "Good Lord, what's happened to you?" Gabriella looked up into the concerned face of Isaiah Blackwell, a cowboy who had recently begun working at the Henderson Ranch neighboring her father's property. Tall and lean with piercing blue eyes and sun-bronzed skin, Isaiah was new to Carson City, having arrived only 2 months prior from Texas. Though they'd exchanged only a few words at church socials and town gatherings, Gabriella had noticed how he never seemed to partake in the rowdiness of the other ranch hands when they came to town. "I'm fine, Mr. Blackwell," she lied, even as she swayed slightly on her feet. "Just a small accident." Isaiah dismounted in one fluid motion, his eyes fixed on her poorly concealed arm. "That's no small accident, Miss Wilson." His voice was gentle but firm. "Your arm's broken." Gabriella couldn't maintain the facade any longer. "I need to get to doctor." "Marshall's," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Without another word, Isaiah stepped closer, his expression darkening as he noted the bruising already forming on her wrist where her father had gripped her. "Did your father do this?" he asked quietly. Gabriella looked away, which was answer enough. She'd never told anyone about her father's temper, about the bruises she hid beneath her sleeves and high collars. Shame washed over her shame that had been ingrained since her mother's death, when the beatings began. "Let me help you up," Isaiah said, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of anger she could sense wasn't directed at her. With careful movements, he lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. His arms came around to hold the reins, creating a protective circle without touching her injured arm. "You'll never be hurt again," he said, his voice low and fierce against her ear as they set off toward town. "Not while I draw breath." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, a promise that felt both impossible and desperately needed. Gabriella didn't respond, focusing instead on staying conscious through the waves of pain. But something in those words, in the determined set of Isaiah's jaw, and the gentle way he cradled her against him, planted a seed of hope she hadn't felt in years. Dr. Marshall's office sat at the edge of Carson City's Main Street, a modest clapboard building with a small sign identifying it as the local medical practice. As they approached, Isaiah carefully dismounted before helping Gabriella down, supporting her weight as they walked to the door. The doctor, a graying man in his 50s with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression, looked up from his desk as they entered. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Gabriella's arm. "Good heavens, child," he exclaimed, rising immediately. "What's happened here?" Before Gabriella could formulate another lie, Isaiah spoke. "Her arm's broken, Doc. Needs setting right away." Dr. Marshall guided Gabriella to an examination table, his experienced hands gently assessing the injury. "Clean break of the radius," he muttered. "Going to hurt to set it, but should heal well enough with proper care." He looked up at Gabriella's pale face. "How did this happen, Miss Wilson?" Gabriella's eyes flicked to Isaiah, who stood near the doorway, his expression stoic but his eyes never leaving her. She swallowed hard. "I fell," she said weakly, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. Dr. Marshall's lips pressed into a thin line, and she could tell he didn't believe her. He'd treated enough accidents in his years of practice to recognize the signs of something more sinister. But he merely nodded, turning to prepare his supplies. "Mr. Blackwell, I'll need your assistance," the doctor said. "This will be painful, and Miss Wilson will need someone to hold her steady." Isaiah moved to Gabriella's side without hesitation, his calloused hand finding hers. "Squeeze as hard as you need to," he told her, his voice steady. "I don't mind." When the doctor manipulated the broken bone back into place, Gabriella's scream tore through the small office. Her fingers dug into Isaiah's hand with surprising strength, but he never flinched, his eyes locked on hers, offering silent strength. Tears streamed down her face as Dr. Marshall worked quickly to splint and wrap the arm. "There now," the doctor said when he finished. "It'll need to stay immobilized for at least 6 weeks. I'll need to check it regularly to ensure it's healing properly." He moved to a cabinet, retrieving a small brown bottle. "Laudanum for the pain. Just a few drops when it becomes unbearable." Isaiah took the bottle, tucking it into his vest pocket. "I'll see she gets home safely." Dr. Marshall looked between them, then spoke in a measured tone. "Miss Wilson, if you ever need a safe place to stay, my wife and I have a spare room, for any reason at all." The implication was clear, and Gabriella felt a surge of shame and gratitude. "Thank you, Dr. Marshall. How much do I owe you for today?" The doctor waved his hand dismissively. "We can settle accounts another time. You focus on healing now." Outside, the sun had nearly set, painting Carson City in hues of gold and amber. The main street was still busy with the evening's activities, the saloon doors swinging open and closed as miners and cowboys sought refreshment after a long day's work, shopkeepers closing up for the night, and a few families making their way home from late errands. Gabriella hesitated, knowing her father might still be at the saloon if he saw her with Isaiah. As if reading her thoughts, Isaiah spoke. "You can't go back there tonight." "I have to," she replied automatically. "He'll be even angrier if I'm not home." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "He broke your arm, Miss Wilson. What will he break next time?" The blunt question hit her like a physical blow. There had always been a next time, each incident worse than the last. She told herself it was the grief, the drink that her father wasn't truly a monster. But standing there, her arm throbbing despite the initial dose of laudanum the doctor had given her, Gabriella couldn't summon the energy to defend him any longer. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted quietly. Isaiah considered this for a moment. "The Henderson Ranch has a small cabin where the foreman's widow lived until she moved to Sacramento last month. It's empty now, but clean and secure. You could stay there tonight at least." The offer was tempting a night away from her father's unpredictable rage, but Gabriella shook her head. "I can't just disappear. He'd tear the town apart looking for me." "Then I'll speak to him," Isaiah said firmly. Fear clutched at Gabriella's heart. "No, you don't understand. He's dangerous when he drinks." Isaiah's eyes hardened. "So am I when innocent people are being hurt." Before she could protest further, a commotion down the street caught their attention. Silas Wilson staggered out of the Silver Dollar Saloon, his voice raised in anger as he argued with another patron. Even from this distance, Gabriella could see he was heavily intoxicated, barely able to stand straight. She instinctively shrank back against the wall of the doctor's office, her good hand reaching for Isaiah's arm. "Please, let's go. I don't want him to see us." But it was too late. Silas had turned, his bloodshot eyes scanning the street until they landed on his daughter. Recognition, followed by rage, transformed his face. "Gabriella," he bellowed, stumbling forward. "What are you doing in town? Who's that man with you?" Isaiah stepped protectively in front of Gabriella. "Stay here," he murmured to her before walking toward the approaching Silas. "Mr. Wilson," Isaiah called, his voice calm but carrying. "Your daughter needed medical attention. I brought her to see Dr. Marshall." Silas Wilson was a large man, though years of hard drinking had softened what had once been the powerful build of a rancher. He stopped a few feet from Isaiah, swaying slightly, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the younger man. "Blackwell," he spat. "The new hand over at Henderson's." "What business do you have with my daughter?" "I found her on the road trying to walk to town with a broken arm," Isaiah replied evenly. "As any decent man would, I helped her." Silas's face darkened. "My daughter's welfare is none of your concern. She's coming home with me now." "I don't think that's wise, sir. The doctor says she needs rest and care." Silas took a menacing step forward. "Are you telling me how to treat my own flesh and blood, boy?" By now, their confrontation had drawn attention. Several patrons had emerged from the saloon, and passers-by had slowed to watch the exchange. Carson City might have been growing, but it was still small enough that a public disagreement was evening entertainment. "I'm suggesting that a father shouldn't be the cause of his daughter's injuries," Isaiah said, his voice low but carrying in the evening air. A hush fell over the onlookers. Accusations of that nature weren't made lightly, especially not in public. Silas's face flushed deep red, and for a moment he seemed too shocked to respond. "You insolent dog," he finally sputtered. "How dare you? My daughter is clumsy, always has been. Fell off the porch steps, didn't you, Gabriella?" He looked past Isaiah to where Gabriella stood, his eyes commanding her to confirm his lie. Gabriella felt the weight of numerous stares turned to her. Her throat tightened. All her life, she'd covered for him, made excuses, hidden the truth out of fear and misplaced loyalty. Standing there with her arm aching and her father's expectant glare boring into her, something inside her finally broke. "No," she said, her voice barely audible at first, then stronger. "No, Father, I didn't fall. You broke my arm because I spoke to Thomas Webster at the general store." The admission hung in the air like a gunshot. Several women in the crowd gasped, and one of the men spat disgustedly on the ground. Silas Wilson's reputation in Carson City had been deteriorating for years, but this public confirmation of his violence crossed a line. Silas's face contorted with fury. "You ungrateful little," he lunged forward, clearly intending to reach Gabriella, but Isaiah was faster, stepping firmly into his path. "That's enough," Isaiah said, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. He didn't draw it, but the message was clear. "Miss Wilson won't be returning home with you tonight or any night until you're sober enough to understand what you've done." Sheriff Miller, who had been watching from outside the jailhouse, finally stepped forward. A tall man with a thick mustache and an air of weary authority, he placed himself between Isaiah and Silas. "Wilson, you're drunk and causing a disturbance," he said firmly. "You can spend the night in my jail to cool off." He glanced at Gabriella's splinted arm, his expression hardening. "And we'll have a serious conversation in the morning about what happened to your daughter." For a moment, it seemed Silas might resist, but surrounded by disapproving townsfolk and faced with the sheriff's authority, he eventually submitted, though not without a parting shot. "This isn't over," he growled at Isaiah. "And you," he added, glaring at Gabriella, "don't bother coming home if you're going to spread lies about your own father." As Sheriff Miller led Silas away, Gabriella felt her knees weaken. The public confrontation, the pain in her arm, and the realization that she had nowhere to go overwhelmed her. Isaiah was at her side instantly, supporting her before she could fall. "Let me take you to that cabin I mentioned," he said quietly. "You need rest, and tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Too exhausted to argue, Gabriella nodded. Isaiah helped her onto his horse once more, and they rode out of town, leaving behind the murmuring crowd and the weight of what had just occurred. The Henderson Ranch sprawled across several hundred acres east of Carson City. In the moonlight, Gabriella could make out the main house in the distance, but Isaiah guided his horse toward a small cabin set apart from the other buildings. It was a humble structure, but solid, with a small porch and chimney. "Mrs. Henderson knows about your situation," Isaiah explained as he helped Gabriella dismount. "Her husband is away on business in Sacramento, but she sent word that you're welcome to stay as long as needed." "How did she find out so quickly?" Gabriella asked, surprised. Isaiah's expression was somewhat sheepish. "Carson City has a way of spreading news. One of the Henderson Ranch hands was in town and rode ahead to inform her." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. A small parlor with a fireplace, a kitchen area, a bedroom, and not much else. But it was clean, with fresh linens on the bed and a pantry stocked with basic provisions. "Mrs. Henderson sent these over," Isaiah said, indicating a bundle on the table. "Some clothing and personal items. She thought you might need them." Gabriella was overwhelmed by the kindness of these near strangers. "I don't know how to thank her, or you." Isaiah busied himself lighting the fire. "No thanks needed. No decent person would do any different." Once the fire was crackling, casting a warm glow throughout the small cabin, Isaiah prepared to leave. "I'll be in the bunkhouse if you need anything. Just ring that bell on the porch and someone will hear it." He hesitated. "Will you be all right alone?" Gabriella managed a small smile. "I've been alone for a long time, Mr. Blackwell." Something in her words seemed to affect him deeply. He nodded once, his expression solemn. "Not anymore, Miss Wilson. Good night." After Isaiah left, Gabriella sat by the fire, trying to process everything that had happened. Her life had been upended in the span of a single day. She had publicly accused her father of abuse, been effectively disowned, and found refuge with people she barely knew. The future, which had always seemed a predetermined path of endurance under her father's roof, now stretched before her, uncertain but full of possibilities. With her good hand, she reached up to touch the locket around her neck, the only keepsake she had from her mother. "What would you think of me now, Mama?" she whispered to the empty room. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her and Gabriella made her way to the bedroom. As she drifted off to sleep, the pain in her arm dulled by laudanum, she thought of Isaiah Blackwell's fierce promise, "You'll never be hurt again." Words spoken by a man she barely knew, yet they had kindled something within her, a fragile hope she hardly dared to nurture. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's windows. For a moment, Gabriella was disoriented, expecting to wake in her small room at her father's ranch. The dull ache in her arm quickly reminded her of reality. She had just managed to dress herself, a challenging task, with one arm immobilized when a knock sounded at the door. Opening it revealed Mrs. Henderson, a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a practical manner. "Good morning, Miss Wilson," she said warmly. "I've brought breakfast and thought we might talk." Over a simple meal of biscuits, bacon, and coffee, Mrs. Henderson explained that Sheriff Miller had come by early that morning. Silas Wilson had been released from jail but warned to keep his distance from his daughter. "The sheriff says your father is threatening to contest your right to independence, claiming you're not of age to make your own decisions," Mrs. Henderson said carefully. Gabriella set down her coffee cup. "I turned 18 last December. That's what Isaiah told the sheriff. Still, your father seems determined to reassert his authority." "What can I do?" Gabriella asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Mrs. Henderson's expression was sympathetic but practical. "You need to establish your independence quickly. The best way would be to secure employment and lodging of your own." She hesitated. "I understand you're skilled with numbers and ledgers," Gabriella nodded. Her mother had insisted on her education, teaching her reading, writing, and arithmetic before her passing. Since then, Gabriella had maintained the ranch's books for her father, one of the few tasks he grudgingly admitted she performed well. "As it happens, I'm in need of assistance with the ranch accounts. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, and with Mr. Henderson traveling frequently for business." She let the implication hang in the air. "You're offering me a position?" Gabriella asked, hope rising within her. "Room, board, and a modest salary," Mrs. Henderson confirmed. "You can stay in this cabin. It's far enough from the main house to give you privacy, but close enough that you'll be safe." Tears sprang to Gabriella's eyes. "I don't know what to say." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "Say yes, dear. It solves both our problems." "Yes," Gabriella said without hesitation. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson." "Eleanor, please," the older woman replied with a smile. "Now I've asked Isaiah to take you to town later to collect any belongings you wish to retrieve from your father's house. Sheriff Miller will accompany you to ensure there's no trouble." The thought of facing her father again sent a chill through Gabriella, but she knew it was necessary. She had left with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket. There were a few treasured possessions. She hoped to recover her mother's Bible, a small box of keepsakes, and some clothing. "Isaiah will look after you," Eleanor Henderson assured her, seeming to sense her apprehension. "He's a good man, quiet but steady." A few hours later, Isaiah arrived with a wagon. Gabriella had spent the morning familiarizing herself with the cabin and resting her arm, which throbbed despite the laudanum. The sight of him standing on her porch, hat in hand, brought an unexpected flutter to her stomach. "Miss Wilson," he greeted her. "Are you ready to head into town?" Gabriella nodded, securing her shawl around her shoulders. As ready as I'll ever be." The ride to Carson City was quiet at first. Isaiah seemed content with silence, focusing on guiding the horses along the dusty road. It was Gabriella who eventually broke the stillness. "Mr. Blackwell, I never properly thanked you for yesterday." Isaiah glanced at her, his expression softening. "No need for thanks, Miss Wilson." "Gabriella," she offered, "after everything, it seems silly to stand on formality." A small smile touched his lips. "Isaiah, then, have you worked for the Hendersons long?" she asked, curious about this man who had so decisively altered the course of her life. "About 2 months," he replied. "Came west from Texas looking for a fresh start. And before Texas—" Isaiah's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Tennessee, originally. Left after the war. Even 8 years after its conclusion, the Civil War remained a sensitive topic, especially for those from the South." Gabriella didn't press further on that subject. "The Hendersons are good people," she said instead. "Mrs. Henderson, a Leaner, has offered me a position managing their accounts." Isaiah's expression brightened. "That's good news. You'll be staying at the cabin then?" "Yes. It seems I've found a new home quite unexpectedly." They lapsed into comfortable silence again until Carson City came into view. As they approached the main street, Gabriella's anxiety returned. Sheriff Miller was waiting for them outside the jailhouse, his stern face softening slightly at the sight of Gabriella's splinted arm. "Miss Wilson," he greeted her, "your father is at the Lucky Strike Saloon, has been since opening. I'll accompany you to the ranch to collect your things." The Wilson Ranch appeared deserted when they arrived. The faded white clapboard house with its sagging porch stood silent in the midday sun. Chickens pecked listlessly in the yard, and the barn door swung slightly in the breeze. What had once been a prosperous operation now showed clear signs of neglect: fences in need of repair, fields untended, livestock thin. Gabriella led the way into the house, bracing herself for memories both good and painful. The main room smelled of stale whiskey and unwashed dishes. Her father's presence lingered in every corner, but thankfully, he was not there in person. "I won't be long," she told Isaiah and the sheriff, who remained near the door in her small bedroom. Gabriella worked quickly with her good arm, gathering clothing and personal items into a carpet bag Isaiah had provided. Her fingers traced the worn quilt her mother had made, but it was too bulky to take. The Bible was in its place on the nightstand, and she carefully wrapped it in a shawl before placing it in the bag. The most precious item was hidden beneath a loose floorboard under her bed, a small wooden box containing a few pieces of her mother's jewelry, letters, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, before drink and bitterness had claimed her father's soul. Gabriella knelt awkwardly, struggling to pry up the board with one hand. "Can I help?" Isaiah's voice came from the doorway. Gabriella looked up, surprised by his presence but grateful. "There's a box under this board. It contains my mother's things." Isaiah knelt beside her, easily lifting the floorboard to reveal the small cherry wood box. He handed it to Gabriella, who clutched it to her chest for a moment before adding it to her bag. "That's everything," she said, looking around the room one last time. As they stepped back into the main room, the front door crashed open. Silas Wilson stood in the doorway, his face flushed with drink and anger. Behind him, Sheriff Miller appeared, looking apologetic. "He gave me the slip," the sheriff explained. "Came in the back way of the saloon." "So," Silas growled, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Gabriella, "the ungrateful daughter returns to steal from her father." "I'm only taking what's mine," Gabriella replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Nothing in this house is yours," Silas shouted. "Everything belongs to me, including you until you're married off properly." Isaiah stepped forward, placing himself between Gabriella and her father. "Miss Wilson is 18, Mr. Wilson. She's free to go where she pleases." Silas's face darkened. "You again." "Filling my daughter's head with notions of independence." He took a menacing step forward. "This is family business, Cowboy. Step aside." "That's enough, Wilson," Sheriff Miller intervened. "Your daughter has every right to collect her personal belongings. And after what you did to her arm, you're lucky I'm not throwing you back in jail." Silas's expression twisted with fury, and something else, a momentary flash of shame, quickly buried beneath anger. "She's lying. Always been a fantasist, just like her mother." The mention of her mother sparked something in Gabriella. "Don't you dare speak of her. She loved you, tried to save you from yourself, and you destroyed her with your cruelty just as you've tried to destroy me." For a second, Silas seemed taken aback by her defiance. Then his face hardened. "Get out of my house, all of you. And you," he pointed a trembling finger at Gabriella, "don't ever come back." "Gladly," Gabriella replied, her voice stronger than she felt. With Isaiah at her side and the sheriff following, she walked past her father without another glance, clutching her carpetbag of meager possessions. Outside, in the harsh sunlight, Gabriella took a deep breath. Behind her stood the only home she'd ever known. Ahead lay an uncertain future. But for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. "Are you all right?" Isaiah asked quietly as he helped her into the wagon. Gabriella looked back at the house one last time. "I will be," she answered, and found she truly believed it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and healing. Dr. Marshall checked Gabriella's arm regularly, pleased with how the break was mending. The work at the Henderson Ranch proved satisfying. Alina was a fair employer who valued Gabriella's meticulous attention to detail, and the ranch hands treated her with respect, no doubt influenced by Isaiah's protective stance. Isaiah himself had become a steady presence in her life. Though his duties often kept him busy from dawn till dusk, he made time each evening to check on Gabriella, sometimes bringing small gifts, a wildflower, a book borrowed from Mrs. Henderson's library, or once, a kitten from a litter born in the barn. The small gray creature, which Gabriella named Shadow, became her constant companion, curled up beside her as she worked on the ledgers. Carson City itself seemed to have taken sides in the silent war between Gabriella and her father. Most townspeople greeted her warmly when she ventured into town for supplies or to attend Sunday services. A few, mostly her father's drinking companions, cast disapproving glances, but Gabriella found she cared less about their opinions with each passing day. Silas Wilson himself maintained his distance, though rumors reached Gabriella that the ranch was falling further into disrepair. He had hired a young man from Virginia City to help with the work, but the arrangement was not going well. Part of her felt guilty. The ranch had been her mother's pride, and watching it deteriorate pained her. But another part, the part that still woke in the night with phantom pain in her arm, knew she could never return to that life. One evening in late June, as Gabriella sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the Sierra Nevada mountains gold and crimson, Isaiah approached, leading his horse. He had been away for 3 days, helping deliver a herd of cattle to a buyer in Virginia City. "Evening, Gabriella," he called, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Mind if I join you?" "Please do," she replied, smiling. "How was Virginia City?" Isaiah settled onto the porch step beside her, removing his hat. "Bustling as ever. The silver mines are bringing in new people every day." He reached into his saddlebag and produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Brought you something." Gabriella accepted the package with her good hand. Her right arm was still splinted but healing well. Unwrapping it revealed a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials, GW, embossed in gold on the cover. "Isaiah," she breathed, running her fingers over the soft leather. "It's beautiful." "Saw you using scraps of paper for your notes," he explained, a touch of color rising in his tan cheeks. "Thought you might like something proper to write in." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. In the weeks since she'd left her father's house, Isaiah had shown her countless small kindnesses, but this felt different, more personal. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll treasure it." They sat in companionable silence as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Shadow emerged from the cabin to investigate the visitor, rubbing against Isaiah's boots before settling in Gabriella's lap. "Doctor." "Marshall says the splint can come off next week," Gabriella mentioned, absently stroking the kitten. Isaiah nodded, his expression pleased. "That's good news. Has there been any word from your father?" Gabriella shook her head. "Nothing direct, Mrs. Parker at the general store mentioned he's drinking more than ever." She sighed. "I worry about him despite everything." Isaiah studied her profile in the gathering dusk. "You have a generous heart, Gabriella Wilson," she smiled ruefully. "Or a foolish one?" "No," Isaiah said firmly. "Not foolish, strong. It takes strength to care for someone who's hurt you." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that had been growing steadily over the weeks. Isaiah leaned slightly closer, then seemed to catch himself, straightening with a small cough. "It's getting late," he said, rising to his feet. "I should let you rest." Gabriella stood as well, Shadow jumping from her lap with an indignant meow. "Isaiah," she began, then hesitated, uncertain what she wanted to say. He waited, his eyes questioning. "Would you like to come to Sunday service with me?" she finally asked. "As my escort, I mean, not just happening to be there at the same time." A slow smile spread across Isaiah's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "I'd be honored, Gabriella." After he left, Gabriella remained on the porch, clutching her new journal and watching the stars emerge one by one. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt truly hopeful about the future. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Gabriella dressed with particular care in her best calico dress, relieved that her arm was healing well enough that dressing herself was no longer an ordeal. She had even managed to arrange her dark hair in a simple but becoming style, with a few curls framing her face. Isaiah arrived promptly, wearing a clean black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard, making him look younger than his 24 years. "You look lovely," he said when Gabriella opened the door, his blue eyes warming with admiration. "As do you," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Handsome, I mean, not lovely." Isaiah chuckled, offering his arm. "I'd take either compliment from you, Gabriella." The small church in Carson City was already filling with townspeople when they arrived. Gabriella felt numerous eyes turn in their direction as Isaiah escorted her to a pew. Among the Baptist congregation, it was well understood that arriving together at Sunday service signaled a courtship, or at least serious intentions. Leaner Henderson, seated nearby with her ranch foreman and his wife, gave Gabriella an approving nod. "Doctor." Marshall and his wife smiled warmly at the pair. Even Sheriff Miller, standing at the back as was his custom, tipped his hat slightly in acknowledgement. Only one face showed clear disapproval. Silas Wilson sat alone in a rear pew, his appearance more disheveled than Gabriella had ever seen it. His bloodshot eyes narrowed at the sight of his daughter on Isaiah Blackwell's arm, and he made no attempt to hide his scowl. Gabriella felt a moment of apprehension, but Isaiah's steady presence beside her gave her courage. She held her head high, refusing to let her father's disapproval dim the brightness of the day. The service passed pleasantly, with Reverend Thompson delivering a sermon on forgiveness and new beginnings that seemed particularly appropriate. As the congregation filed out afterward, many stopped to greet Gabriella and Isaiah, offering good wishes that barely disguised their curiosity about the developing relationship. Gabriella was speaking with Mrs. Marshall when she felt a rough hand on her arm. She turned to find her father standing there, his breath smelling of whiskey despite the early hour. "So this is how you repay me for raising you," he growled, voice low but venomous, parading around town with this drifter, shaming the Wilson name. Isaiah appeared instantly at Gabriella's side. "Mr. Wilson, this isn't the place." "Don't tell me what's proper, boy," Silas snarled. "My daughter thinks she's too good for her own father now that she's got a cowboy sniffing around her skirts." Several nearby congregants gasped at the crude implication. Gabriella felt herself trembling, not with fear this time but with anger. "Father, you're making a scene," she said firmly. "Go home and sober up." Silas's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" "That's enough, Wilson," Sheriff Miller interrupted, stepping between them. "You're drunk in church on Sunday morning. I suggest you leave before I have to arrest you again." For a tense moment, it seemed Silas might resist, but eventually he backed down, casting one last venomous look at Gabriella. "This isn't over," he muttered before staggering away. "I'm sorry," Gabriella whispered to Isaiah once her father was gone. "I should have expected something like this." Isaiah took her hand, unconcerned about the onlookers. "You have nothing to apologize for, Gabriella. Nothing." The incident cast a shadow over what should have been a perfect day, but Isaiah was determined not to let Silas Wilson's bitterness ruin their time together. After church, he took Gabriella on a picnic beside the Carson River, in a peaceful spot where cottonwoods provided shade from the summer sun. As they shared a simple meal of fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie prepared by the Henderson Ranch cook, Gabriella gradually relaxed, the tension from the confrontation with her father melting away. Isaiah proved to be an engaging companion, sharing stories of his travels across Texas and the territories, making her laugh with tales of his misadventures as a young cowhand. "You've lived quite a life already," Gabriella remarked, leaning back against a tree trunk. "I've never been farther than Virginia City." Isaiah stretched out on the blanket, hands behind his head as he gazed up at the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. "There's a lot of country out there, beautiful places. Someday, I'd like to show you." The casual implication of a shared future made Gabriella's heart beat faster. "I'd like that," she said softly. Isaiah sat up, his expression suddenly serious. "Gabriella, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks—" He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "Yes," she encouraged. "I care for you," he said simply. "More than I expected to care for anyone again after what happened back east." Gabriella sensed there was more to that story, some pain he wasn't ready to share, but she didn't press. "I care for you too, Isaiah." His blue eyes searched hers. "Your father was right about one thing. I am a drifter, never stayed in one place too long since the war, but meeting you." He took her hand, his thumb gently tracing circles on her palm. "Makes me want to put down roots." Gabriella felt as though her heart might burst with the sweet ache of newfound love. She'd never allowed herself to imagine this kind of happiness, had resigned herself to a life under her father's thumb until she could escape through marriage to some local boy who might or might not be kind. Instead, here was this man, honorable, gentle, strong, offering her a vision of a future bright with possibility. "Isaiah," she whispered, leaning toward him. He closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both tender and filled with promise. Gabriella had never been kissed before, and the sweetness of it made her dizzy. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I should take you back," he murmured reluctantly, "before your reputation is completely in tatters." Gabriella laughed softly. "I think that ship sailed when I moved into a cabin on my own and started stepping out with a handsome cowboy." Isaiah grinned, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. "Fair point, Miss Wilson. Still, I aim to court you properly." As they gathered the remains of their picnic, neither noticed the figure watching from the distant tree-line. Silas Wilson, his face twisted with anger and something that might have been grief, before he turned and stumbled back toward town. The following week brought another milestone. Dr. Marshall removed Gabriella's splint, pronouncing her arm healed though still in need of gentle treatment. The freedom of movement was a relief, even if the arm remained somewhat weak and occasionally painful. "Good as new in another month or so," the doctor assured her. "Your young and healthy bones mend quickly at your age." What didn't mend so quickly, Gabriella discovered, were the psychological wounds. She still flinched at sudden movements, still woke sometimes from nightmares in which her father's rage found her in her new sanctuary. But each day brought a little more healing, a little more confidence. Isaiah's courtship progressed with a proper formality that made Gabriella smile, given the circumstances of their first meeting. He called at the cabin each evening after his duties were complete, sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk, other times to escort her on walks around the Henderson property. On Saturdays, they often rode into Carson City together, drawing knowing smiles from the townspeople who had watched their relationship blossom. Silas Wilson maintained his distance, though Gabriella occasionally caught glimpses of him in town, looking increasingly haggard. The ranch, she heard, was failing badly, with fences untended and cattle straying. Part of her heart ached for the loss of her childhood home, but she knew there was no going back. July brought scorching heat to the Nevada territory. The days stretched long and dry, the surrounding hills turning golden as the grasses cured in the sun. Work on the Henderson ranch was demanding during this season. Cattle needed to be moved to higher pastures where grass remained green. Water sources had to be carefully managed, and the threat of wildfire loomed constantly. Isaiah worked from dawn to dusk most days, often returning to the bunkhouse too exhausted for anything but a brief good night to Gabriella. She understood. Busy herself with the ranch accounts and helping Alina Henderson manage the household in the continuing absence of her husband, who had extended his business in Sacramento. One particularly hot afternoon, Gabriella was reviewing the ledgers in her cabin when an urgent knocking at the door startled her. Opening it revealed Caleb Jenkins, one of the younger ranch hands, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "Fire, Miss Wilson," he gasped. "Up in the north pasture. Mr. Blackwell sent me to fetch everyone who can help. It's moving fast with this wind." Gabriella's heart clenched with fear. Wildfires were the nightmare of every rancher, capable of destroying everything in their path with terrifying speed. "I'll come right away," she said, grabbing a shawl to cover her head. "Have you alerted Mrs. Henderson?" "Yes. She's organizing the house staff now." Gabriella followed Caleb to where horses were being hastily saddled. Alina Henderson, her usually neat appearance disheveled, was giving rapid instructions to the assembled ranch hands. "The fire's moving southeast," she was saying. "If we can't contain it, it'll reach the Wilson property next, then possibly the edge of town if the wind holds." The mention of her father's ranch sent a jolt through Gabriella. Despite everything, The thought of Silas Wilson alone, possibly drunk, facing a wildfire was unbearable. "Has anyone warned my father?" she asked, approaching Alina. The older woman's expression was grim. "We sent Tom to ride that way, but he hasn't returned." "I'll go," Gabriella said immediately. Alina shook her head. "Too dangerous, Gabriella. The men will handle it." "He's my father," Gabriella insisted. "And I know that property better than anyone. Every water source, every fire break." She glanced around at the assembled ranch hands. "You need every person here to fight the main fire." Alina hesitated, clearly torn. Finally, she nodded. "Take Cinnamon," she said, indicating her own gentle mare. "She's steady in a crisis." "But Gabriella," her voice became stern, "if the fire shifts or moves too quickly, you ride for town. Don't try to be a hero." Promising to be careful, Gabriella mounted the mare and set off toward her father's ranch. Even from a distance, she could see the smoke rising in an ominous dark column against the blue sky. The acrid smell grew stronger as she rode, and she could hear the distant roar of the flames, a sound like a freight train that sent shivers down her spine despite the heat. As she crested a small rise, Gabriella could see the full extent of the fire. It had already burned across much of the Henderson North pasture and was advancing rapidly toward the Wilson property line, driven by gusty winds. Isaiah and the Henderson ranch hands were visible in the distance, using wet blankets and shovels to try to create a fire break, but the flames were moving too quickly for their efforts to be fully effective. Spurring Cinnamon to greater speed, Gabriella rode toward her childhood home, praying she wasn't too late. As she approached, she could see that the situation was dire. The fire was less than a quarter-mile from the main house, and there was no sign of activity, no preparation, no defense being mounted. Dismounting in the yard, Gabriella called out, "Father, Father, are you here? There's a fire coming." No response came from the silent house. Tying Cinnamon to a hitching post where the horse could be quickly released if necessary, Gabriella rushed inside. The main room was empty, littered with dirty dishes and empty bottles. A quick search of the bedrooms revealed no sign of her father. Panic rising, Gabriella ran to check the barn. There she found Silas Wilson, unconscious on a pile of hay, an empty whiskey bottle beside him. The sight filled her with both relief and dread. He was alive, but moving him in this state would be challenging, and the fire was approaching rapidly. "Father," she called, shaking his shoulder roughly. "Father, wake up. We have to leave now." Silas stirred, his bloodshot eyes opening slowly, unfocused. "Wah, Gabriella," he blinked in confusion. "What are you doing here?" "There's a wildfire coming," she explained urgently. "We need to go now." Understanding seemed to penetrate his alcohol-fogged brain. He struggled to sit up. "My ranch. Have to save the ranch." "It's too late for that," Gabriella said firmly, helping him to his feet. "The fire will reach the house in minutes. We need to get to safety." Silas swayed, leaning heavily on his daughter. "My fault," he muttered. "Everything. My fault." There was no time to decipher his ramblings. Supporting her father as best she could, Gabriella half dragged him from the barn toward where Cinnamon waited. The air was now thick with smoke, making it difficult to see or breathe. The roar of the approaching fire had grown louder, and ash was beginning to fall around them like gray snow. They had almost reached the horse when Silas's knees buckled. Gabriella struggled to hold him upright, but he was a large man, and her recently healed arm protested the strain. "Father, please," she gasped. "Just a few more steps." Silas made a visible effort to steady himself, his eyes clearing somewhat. "Should leave me," he slurred. "After what I did to you." "I'm not leaving you," Gabriella stated firmly, pulling him toward the horse. A shout from the direction of the road caught her attention. Looking up, She saw Isaiah galloping toward them, his horse's hooves kicking up dust. "Gabriella," he called, dismounting in one fluid motion. The fire jumped the fire break. "We need to go now." Without hesitation, he took Silas's weight from Gabriella, practically lifting the older man onto Cinnamon's back. "You ride with your father," he instructed. "Keep him steady. I'll follow on Thunderbolt." But as Gabriella moved to mount behind her father, a gust of wind brought a shower of burning embers down upon them. Cinnamon reared in panic, throwing Silas to the ground before bolting away from the yard. Isaiah cursed, turning to his own mount, but Thunderbolt had also been spooked by the falling embers and had retreated to a safer distance. "We'll have to go on foot," Isaiah said grimly, helping Silas to his feet once more. "There's a creek about half a mile east. If we can reach it, we'll be safe in the water." Supporting Silas between them, Gabriella and Isaiah began moving as quickly as possible toward the creek. The smoke was now so thick that visibility was reduced to mere yards, and the heat of the approaching flames pressed against their backs like a physical force. "Leave me," Silas gasped between coughing fits. "Save yourselves." "Not happening, Mr. Wilson," Isaiah replied tersely. "Keep moving." They had covered perhaps a quarter of the distance to the creek when disaster struck. A burning branch, carried by the wind, crashed down directly in their path. Isaiah instinctively pushed Gabriella and Silas aside, but the movement caused Silas to lose his footing on the uneven ground. He fell heavily, crying out in pain. "My leg," he groaned, clutching at his ankle. "Broke it. Can't walk." Isaiah assessed the situation rapidly. The fire was now clearly visible through the smoke, a wall of flame advancing inexorably toward them. There was no time to waste. "I'll carry him," he decided, bending to lift Silas in a fireman's carry despite the older man's considerable weight. "Isaiah, you can't," Gabriella began. "No choice," Isaiah grunted, already moving forward with his burden. "Stay close to me." The journey to the creek became a nightmare of smoke, heat, and exhaustion. Isaiah staggered forward, his face set in grim determination as he carried Silas Wilson's unconscious form. Gabriella stayed at his side, her throat raw from the smoke, her eyes streaming tears that instantly evaporated in the heat. When they finally reached the creek, it was little more than a trickle due to the summer drought, but the banks were clear of vegetation and offered some protection from the fire. Isaiah gently laid Silas down in the shallow water before collapsing beside him, chest heaving with exertion. "We should be safe here," he gasped, pulling Gabriella down beside him into the meager shelter of the water. "Fire won't cross the creek bed." Gabriella dipped her shawl in the water and placed it over her father's face to help him breathe. Silas remained unconscious, his breathing shallow but present. His ankle was clearly broken, the joint already swelling and discolored. "Thank you," she said to Isaiah, her voice barely audible over the approaching roar of the fire. "You saved his life, after everything he did." Isaiah took her hand, his own still trembling with exertion. "I did it for you," he said simply. As the fire reached the edge of the creek, the heat became almost unbearable. They huddled together in the shallow water, covering their faces as best they could, as the flames devoured everything on the opposite bank, before gradually moving on, leaving blackened earth and smoldering debris in its wake. Hours later, when the worst had passed and rescue parties from Carson City began searching the burned areas for survivors, they found the trio still in the creek bed. Silas was taken directly to Dr. Marshall's office for treatment of his broken ankle and smoke inhalation. Gabriella and Isaiah, suffering from exhaustion and minor burns, were brought to the Henderson ranch to recover. Eleanor Henderson, her face lined with worry but relieved to see them alive, insisted they both rest. "The fire destroyed about a third of our north pasture," she reported, "but the ranch buildings are untouched, thank God. Carson City is safe too. The wind shifted just in time." "And my father's ranch?" Gabriella asked, already knowing the answer from what she had seen. Eleanor's expression was sympathetic. "I'm sorry, dear. The house, the barn, everything's gone." Gabriella nodded, a complex mix of emotions washing over her. The ranch had been her home, the site of both happy childhood memories and more recent trauma. Its loss felt significant, yet strangely freeing. "What will happen to my father now?" she asked. "Sheriff Miller says he can stay in town once Dr. Marshall releases him," Eleanor replied. "The church has offered to help with temporary lodging." Isaiah, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "He'll need care for that ankle and to dry out from the drink." Gabriella looked at him, understanding the unspoken question. "I'll help however I can," she said softly. "He's still my father." Isaiah nodded, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "I know. Just remember what I promised you that first day. You'll never be hurt again, not while I'm around." The days following the fire were busy with recovery efforts across the affected areas. Isaiah, despite Eleanor's insistence that he rest, joined the other ranch hands in salvaging what could be saved from the burned pastures and reinforcing fences to contain the remaining cattle. Gabriella divided her time between her duties at the Henderson Ranch and visits to her father, who was staying in a small room behind the church while his ankle healed. These visits were awkward at first, both father and daughter unsure how to breach the chasm that had grown between them. Silas Wilson was a changed man. The fire and his narrow escape seemed to have shocked him into sobriety, at least temporarily. Without alcohol numbing his senses, he was forced to confront the reality of what he had become and the damage he had done. On Gabriella's third visit, as she brought a basket of food prepared by the Henderson ranch cook, Silas finally spoke of what lay between them. "I don't deserve your kindness," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "after what I did to you." Gabriella set down the basket, considering her response carefully. "No, you don't," she agreed, surprising him with her candor. "But I'm not doing this for you, Father. I'm doing it for Mother, who would have wanted me to show compassion. And I'm doing it for myself, because I need to know I tried, even if you go back to the bottle tomorrow." Silas flinched at her words but nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about your arm and everything else." It wasn't much as apologies went, but Gabriella recognized how difficult even those few words had been for her proud father. "Thank you," she said simply. "That cowboy of yours," Silas continued, changing the subject. "He carried me through fire, could have left me to burn. Yes, he could have." "Why didn't he?" Gabriella smiled slightly. "Because he's a good man and because he loves me." Silas absorbed this, his weathered face unreadable. "He's asked for your hand then?" "Not yet," Gabriella admitted, "but I believe he will." Her father nodded slowly. "When he does, you'll have my blessing, for whatever that's worth to you now." The words, so unexpected, brought tears to Gabriella's eyes. "It's worth something," she said softly. "Thank you, Father." As July gave way to August, life began to settle into new patterns. The burned areas started to show the first signs of recovery, with green shoots emerging from the blackened earth after a rare summer rainfall. The Henderson Ranch adjusted to its reduced grazing capacity, and Carson City continued its steady growth, the fire already becoming just another tale in the settlement's young history. Silas Wilson, his ankle healing slowly, began to help with odd jobs around the church, his hands finding purpose in manual labor for the first time in years. He remained sober, attending temperance meetings held in the church basement each Wednesday. The change in him was remarkable, the bloated, red-faced drunkard giving way to a thinner, more somber man with clear eyes and steady hands. Gabriella watched this transformation with cautious hope, but kept her distance emotionally. Some wounds were too deep for quick healing, and while she could forgive, she could not forget the years of fear and pain. They established a careful, polite relationship, more like acquaintances than father and daughter, but it was more than she had expected possible. Meanwhile, her relationship with Isaiah deepened. Their shared experience during the fire had created a bond that transcended ordinary courtship, a knowledge that each would risk everything for the other without hesitation. On a clear August evening, with the worst heat of summer beginning to wane, Isaiah asked Gabriella to accompany him on a ride to a special place he had discovered on the Henderson property. They rode through golden hills, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape, until they reached a small plateau overlooking the Carson Valley. From this vantage point, they could see for miles the silvery ribbon of the Carson River, the distant rooftops of Carson City, and the majestic Sierra Nevada mountains framing the view to the west, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful," Gabriella breathed, dismounting to stand at the edge of the plateau. Isaiah joined her, taking her hand in his. "I found this place the first week I came to work for the Hendersons. Reminded me there's still beauty in the world even when you've seen its ugliness." Gabriella squeezed his hand, understanding there was more behind his words. "Will you tell me someday about what happened back east?" Isaiah was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "My wife and son died in the war," he finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "Our farm was in the path of Sherman's march. I was away fighting, couldn't protect them." Gabriella's heart ached for him. "Isaiah, I'm so sorry." He turned to face her, his blue eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "For 5 years after, I couldn't stay in one place. Kept moving west, taking work where I could find it, never letting myself get attached to anyone or anything." His hand tightened around hers. "Until I saw a brave young woman trying to walk to town with a broken arm, too stubborn to ask for help." Gabriella smiled through the tears that had gathered in her eyes. "I wasn't brave, I was terrified." "That's what makes it bravery," Isaiah countered gently. "Doing what needs doing, even when you're afraid." He took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Gabriella Wilson, I love you. I love your courage, your kindness, your strength. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never fear again, never doubt how precious you are." From his pocket, he produced a simple gold ring. "Will you marry me?" Gabriella felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Isaiah, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, before rising to his feet and pulling her into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepening with the promise of a passion that would have time to fully blossom in the years ahead. When they finally parted, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers, his voice husky with emotion. "I meant what I said that first day, Gabriella. You'll never be hurt again, not while I live." "I know," she replied, believing it completely for the first time. "And you won't be alone with your ghosts anymore. We'll build something new together, something good." They stood together on the plateau as twilight descended, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the sky. Two people who had found in each other the healing they both desperately needed. The wedding took place in October, when the aspens in the mountains had turned to gold, and the air held the first crisp hint of the winter to come. The small church in Carson City was filled with well-wishers, the Henderson ranch hands and household staff. townspeople who had watched the courtship unfold, and even a few cowboys from neighboring ranches who had ridden in for the occasion. Silas Wilson sat in the front pew, his ankle largely healed though he still walked with a slight limp. He was sober, dressed in a new suit purchased with his earnings from the church work, his gray hair neatly trimmed. When Reverend Thompson asked who gave this woman in marriage, Silas stood proudly, saying, "I do," in a clear, steady voice before placing Gabriella's hand in Isaiah's. Alina Henderson had insisted on hosting the wedding breakfast at the main ranch house, the tables laden with every delicacy the ranch cook could prepare. There was music from a fiddle player brought in from Virginia City, dancing on the wide porch, and enough champagne to ensure that even the most stoic cowboys unbent enough to offer toasts to the bride and groom. "Never seen Blackwell smile so much," one ranch hand remarked to another as Isaiah twirled Gabriella in a lively reel, both of their faces alight with happiness. "Man's transformed. The lady, too," his companion noted. "Remember how she was when she first came here. Jumping at shadows, that broken arm held close like she was afraid someone would grab it again. Now look at her." Indeed, Gabriella was radiant in her wedding dress of cream-colored silk, a gift from Alina Henderson. The fear that had shadowed her eyes for so long was gone, replaced by a confident joy that made her even more beautiful. As the celebration continued into the evening, Isaiah pulled his new wife aside for a moment of privacy on the edge of the ranch house garden. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwell?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Gabriella smiled up at him, still marveling at her new name. "Completely, and you?" "More than I ever thought possible again." He hesitated, then added, "I have news. Mr. Henderson returned from Sacramento yesterday." "Yes, I saw him at the ceremony." "Did he object to the foreman's widow's cabin being occupied by newlyweds?" Gabriella asked teasingly. They had planned to continue living in the small cabin where she had found refuge months earlier. Isaiah shook his head, his expression serious but pleased. "Quite the opposite. He's offering me the position of ranch foreman starting next month. The current foreman is retiring to live with his daughter in San Francisco." Gabriella's eyes widened. "Isaiah, that's wonderful, but what about the foreman's house near the main ranch?" "That's part of the offer," Isaiah confirmed. "Mr. Henderson says it's traditionally been part of the foreman's compensation. It's larger than the cabin with 3 bedrooms. His eyes held a question. "Room to grow a family if you wanted that." Gabriella felt a rush of emotion. A real home, a position of responsibility for Isaiah, and the possibility of children in their future. It was more than she had dared to hope for when she fled her father's house with a broken arm and little else. "I want that very much," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "A family with you." The tenderness in his expression made her heart swell. "We'll make it a happy home, Gabriella, a place where there's never any fear, only love." As they rejoined the celebration, Gabriella caught sight of her father sitting alone on a bench, watching the dancing with a wistful expression. Making a decision, she crossed to him, Isaiah following a step behind. "Father," she said, extending her hand, "would you dance with me?" "Just once, for Mother's memory." Silas looked up in surprise, then glanced at Isaiah as if seeking permission. Isaiah nodded slightly, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. Taking Gabriella's hand, Silas rose somewhat stiffly to his feet. "Been a long time since I danced," he admitted as they moved toward the area where others were twirling to a cheerful tune. "Just follow the music," Gabriella advised, leading him into a simple waltz as the fiddle player obligingly shifted to a slower melody. As they turned around the makeshift dance floor, Silas spoke low enough that only she could hear. I don't deserve this kindness, Gabriella, or your forgiveness. Perhaps not, she agreed candidly. But Mother always said forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves as much as others. I'm trying to live by her wisdom now. Silas's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She would be proud of the woman you've become, far stronger than I ever was. When the dance ended, Silas kissed Gabriella's cheek awkwardly before returning her to Isaiah's side. "Take care of her," he said gruffly to his new son-in-law. "With my life, sir," Isaiah promised, and the two men shared a moment of perfect understanding before Silas nodded and moved away. The celebration continued until the stars were bright in the clear autumn sky. Finally, amid cheers and good-natured teasing, Isaiah and Gabriella departed for the cabin that would be their first home together. Inside, with the door closed against the world, they stood for a moment, simply absorbing the reality of their new status as husband and wife. The cabin looked different somehow, transformed by the knowledge that it was now truly their home, if only temporarily until they moved to the foreman's house. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwell," Isaiah said softly, lifting Gabriella's hand to his lips. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. "I never thought I'd feel that again after Mother died." Isaiah drew her gently into his arms. "You'll never lack for it again, I promise you." Their first kiss as husband and wife was tender, filled with all the promise of the life they would build together. As the night deepened around the small cabin, they discovered in each other the healing power of love expressed without fear, without reservation, with perfect trust. Spring 1874 brought new beginnings in more ways than one. The Henderson Ranch flourished under Isaiah's management as foreman, and the foreman's house became a warm and welcoming home. Gabriella continued to manage the ranch accounts, but also found time to establish a small garden and to help Eleanor Henderson with various charitable initiatives in Carson City. Silas Wilson, continuing his sobriety, had found steady employment as a carpenter's assistant, discovering a talent for woodworking that had lain dormant during his years of drinking. He lived modestly in a small room in town and occasionally visited the Blackwell home for Sunday dinner, these gatherings growing less strained with each passing month. In April, as the first wildflowers began to carpet the hills around Carson City, Gabriella shared news that brought Isaiah the greatest joy he had known since their wedding day. "A baby," he repeated, his eyes wide with wonder as they sat together on the porch of their home after dinner. "You're certain?" Gabriella nodded, her hands resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Dr. Marshall confirmed it yesterday. He says the baby should arrive in November." Isaiah dropped to his knees before her chair, gathering her hands in his. "November," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "A child of our own." The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. Isaiah threw himself into readying the nursery, crafting a cradle with his own hands and enlisting Silas's newly developed carpentry skills to help create a rocking chair for Gabriella. The two men, working side by side in the barn that served as Isaiah's workshop, gradually developed, if not friendship, then at least a mutual respect. "Never thought I'd be a grandfather," Silas remarked one evening as they put the finishing touches on the rocking chair. "Certainly never deserved to be." Isaiah paused in his work, studying the older man thoughtfully. "People can change, Mr. Wilson. I've seen it happen." Silas nodded slowly. "With God's help and a second chance." He ran his hand over the smooth wood of the chair's arm. "Think she'll like it?" "She'll love it," Isaiah assured him. "It's beautiful work." The baby arrived on a cold November night with snow falling gently outside the Blackwell home. Dr. Marshall, summoned by a frantic Isaiah when Gabriella's labor began, arrived just in time to oversee the birth of a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "A son," Isaiah whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that trembled slightly. "Gabriella, he's perfect." Exhausted but radiant, Gabriella watched her husband with their child, her heart so full she thought it might burst. What shall we call him? They had discussed names but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking down at the infant's serious little face, Isaiah knew. "Matthew," he said softly. "It means gift from God, and that's what you both are to me." Gabriella smiled, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "Matthew Blackwell, it's perfect." The years that followed brought more blessings than Gabriella could have imagined on that painful day when Isaiah had first found her on the road with a broken arm. Matthew was joined 2 years later by a sister, Sarah, named for Isaiah's mother, and 2 years after that by another boy, Samuel. The Henderson Ranch prospered under Isaiah's management, eventually leading to him becoming a partner in the operation when Mr. Henderson semi-retired in 1878. The Blackwell family built a new, larger home on land that Henderson deeded to them as part of the partnership agreement not far from the plateau where Isaiah had proposed. Silas Wilson remained a part of their lives, a doting grandfather who never touched alcohol again and who found redemption in the love of his grandchildren. He never remarried, dedicating himself instead to his woodworking and to community service through the church. The demons that had driven him to violence were never fully exorcised, but they were contained by his determination to be worthy of his second chance. Carson City grew from a territorial outpost to the capital of the new state of Nevada, bringing changes both welcome and challenging. Through it all, the Blackwell home remained a haven of peace and love, just as Isaiah had promised on that fateful day in 1873. On a warm evening in the summer of 1883, 10 years after they had first met, Isaiah and Gabriella sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the Sierra Nevada. "You ever think about that day?" Gabriella asked, her hand finding his as it often did when they were together. "The day you found me on the road," Isaiah nodded, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished over the years. "Often. It was the day my life began again." Gabriella leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Mine too. I was so afraid then of everything. I could never have imagined this life we've built." "You were always stronger than you knew," Isaiah said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You just needed someone to remind you of it. And you were always the man who kept his promise," she replied softly. "I've never been hurt again, not since that day." As twilight deepened, they called the children in for supper, the family gathering around the large oak table that Silas had crafted as a 5th anniversary gift. There was laughter, stories from the children's day, plans for tomorrow's activities, the ordinary, precious moments that made up a life of extraordinary happiness. Later, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Isaiah and Gabriella stood together at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the star-filled Nevada sky. "I love you, Isaiah Blackwell," Gabriella said simply, turning in his arms to face him, "more with each passing day." "And I love you, Gabriella Blackwell," he replied, his blue eyes as bright with love as they had been on their wedding day. "My brave, beautiful wife." Their kiss held the warmth of a decade of shared joys and overcome sorrows, and the promise of many more years to come, a future built on the foundation of that first promise, made when a broken girl met a lonely cowboy on a dusty Nevada road. "You'll never be hurt again," he had said then, and in keeping that promise, Isaiah Blackwell had found his own healing, his own home, his own heart restored. Together, they had transformed pain into love, fear into courage, and two broken lives into one whole, beautiful family. It was more than a happy ending. It was a testament to the enduring power of compassion, forgiveness, and love's ability to heal even the deepest wounds. And in Carson City, Nevada, folks would tell the story for generations to come. How the Wilson girl with the broken arm and the quiet cowboy from Texas had built one of the most beautiful love stories the territory had ever known, proving that even in the wild, sometimes harsh West, love could flourish and transform lives forever.